Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to the HearthStone Weekly Show. This is episode 31. We're going to be looking at one of Ihearthu's King of the Hills between Realz and Trump. Now, Realz is actually on the Mana Grind NA team, which means that anytime Ihearthu has a King of the Hill with a Mana Grind member, I'm probably going to be doing a weekly on them. Now, before we get started, Moon wanted to make a quick cameo, so say hi.
Hello everyone.
This is what I get for recording on Teamspeak. Anyway, so, moving on to the first game. We've got two decks coming up which have been very, very popular in the metagame recently. We've got Warlock Shields Up, or Warlock Giants, depending on who you ask, or Handlock, which is a dumb name, so I would not recommend using that. But anyway, so the deck revolves around giving taunt to large defensive creatures, like Ancient Watchers, Twilight Drakes, Giants, less defensive when it comes to Giants, but just really hard things to remove. It also has things like Alexstrasza and Jiraxxus for life regen or burst damage in the case of Alexstrasza. And things like Sylvanas to steal things on your opponent's side. Lots of AoE, playing the one Shadow Flame and two Hellfires in this particular version. As I said, there's normally about 3 AoEs in these kinds of decks, and it's a combination of the two. Other interesting things we have in the deck is double Soulfire, which is often only played as a one-off because it can discard a lot of important things that you really don't want to. And besides that, it's pretty standard when it comes to these Warlock Shields Up decks. Now, the deck that Trump is bringing here is a very odd Cantrip Rogue deck. It's a very sort of purist Cantrip Rogue deck, you could call it, where it has a lot of 2-ofs. Not very many techs, and it's just built around consistency as opposed to better in certain different matchups, and the reason for that is it's in a best of 7, but then the arguable side of that is you can bring it in to counter something, but he can't because he doesn't have the techs for that. So we've got double Defias, which is kind of sketchy if you're going first, but if you're going second it's incredibly powerful. Double Novice Engineer, this is just before the patch. This was played about 3 days before the patch, I think. So the Novice Engineers are still 1/2s. Applies to Sylvanas as well, still 5 mana. We've got an Edwin Van Cleef tech, which is interesting because the Edwin Van Cleef can become a 6/6 or an 8/8 possibly in certain situations. And we have Shadowed Sun Clerics and Dark Iron Dwarves and Defenders. We have the full 6 buffs, which can clog up your hand a bit, but it gives you a lot of early power in the first couple turns and just smashing through damage. Now, for cantrips, we have Gnomish Inventors, Loot Hoarders, Novice Engineers, Azure Drakes, pretty much all the cantrips you can have, apart from Blood Mage. It's interesting that Blood Mage isn't in here. But when you think about it, it only affects 2 spells, but it is still very, very weird that Blood Mage isn't in this deck. And rounding out the deck, we have Sylvanas and Argent Commander. As I said, there is very few 1-ofs. The only 1-ofs are the 2 legendaries, and they cancel each other out in terms of 1-ofs. The rest, all the things that can be 2-ofs are 2-ofs. Something which Trump tends to do. Now, yes, I have muted YouTube, so we don't have to deal with Artosis talking. Yes, is one of the only disadvantages of using the King of the Hills is you have to mute the video so you can't have the game sounds. But it is a good source of professional games, whereas there aren't that many of them at the moment. So anyway, opening hands, we've got Trump going first, Realz is going second. Trump's opening hand is actually kind of sketchy. We've got Novice first, but the rest of his hand is pretty bad considering the matchup, although it could be aggro Warlock, which is probably why he kept a Deadly Poison. As for Realz' hand, it's horrific. I'll be quite honest here. Realz' hand is horrible. He has Ancient Watcher with no ways of giving it taunt or silencing it, and he has Earthen Ring Farseers, which you want to use late game. Now, he did just draw the Sunfear Protector, but his hand was pretty trash before then. As for Trump, his hand is getting better. He's drawn into a lot of early stuff. He's drawn to a Novice and a Shadowed Sun Cleric and a Harvest, so he's getting some early board position down. The other option was playing Shadowed Sun Cleric, but I think Harvest Golem is more sturdy against control decks. And life tapping on turn 2 is a lot of information. It does show that you're playing against a control deck. Now, I'm guessing here we're probably going to see a Dark Iron Dwarf. We could see a Shattered Sun Cleric targeting the Harvest Golem, but that's very vulnerable to Hellfire, so I think he's going to go for the Dark Iron onto the Novice, trade with the 3/3, and then just attack with the Harvest Golem. It's a safer war position. He can't just 3-for-1 himself, which is what would probably happen otherwise. Anyway, so Realz is in a bit of a sketchy situation here. He can go for the Ancient Watcher into Taunt, which I think is the best play here. He could also Soulfire the Dark Iron, but he could discard something important. He can't really deal with the Harvest Golem. Oh, Coin Sylvanas. Yeah, I can see that. Coin Sylvanas is another way of doing it. I'm so used to Sylvanas being 6 mana now, but anyway, 5 mana Sylvanas means he can do that. If Sylvanas was 6 mana, as it is now, probably be better to just go for the Ancient Watcher Taunt, but in this situation that is in fact better. Now on Trump's end, I think there are 2 options. Novice Engineer into Shattered Sun Cleric, or Sylvanas. One of them is more vulnerable to Hellfire, the other one is more vulnerable to things like Siphon Soul, but it's turn 5 so you can't do that yet. Sylvanas is very, very powerful at this stage of the game. This is at 5 mana, this is one of the reasons it was nerfed. If he puts down Sylvanas, his opponent can't really trade with it efficiently, so I'd probably put the Sylvanas down here. But as I said, the other option is Novice into Shattered. Little more vulnerable to AoE, but still very doable. Now, if I recall correctly, what we end up seeing here from Trump is one of the worst misplays I have ever seen. But that'll come up in a couple of minutes, because this is Trump and he plays incredibly slowly. He's the opposite of Noxious when it comes to playing. With Noxious, you have to pause the game so you can talk about what he's going to do before he does it. With Trump, you can leave it playing, talk about both players' hands, and he'll eventually do the move. In most situations, it does mean that he makes the correct play, because he's thinking about every single possibility, but in this case, you'd think that he'd go for the Shattered Sun Cleric to avoid things like Mortal Coil. But what he ends up doing is Dagger into Deadly Poison, I think. I think this is the game that he does it. Dagger into blank Dagger, Deadly Poison, and he doesn't attack with it. It's just a weird play. Come on, Trump, there's 2 options. Should not take you half an hour to make them. But yeah, that was possibly the worst play he could have made. It was horrible. Like, the only one that was worse was Defias Ringleader with no combo into Deadly Poison Dagger. That was literally the only worst play. He made the worst possible play in that situation. If Realz had a Acidic Swamp Ooze, he would be so messed up at the moment. Fortunately, he doesn't play Ooze, but even then, you want to keep the Dagger Deadly Poison thing as a surprise, not just leave it on the board. It was just a weird play. So anyway, for Realz here, we've got a couple of options. He did Mortal Coil, the 2/1 to draw a card, which was correct. Now, we can see an Ancient Watcher, possibly a blank Ancient Watcher. Yeah, I can see that. Life tap into blank Ancient Watcher. Because it means that he can give it Taunt, and the likelihood of it dying this turn is very, very slim. So, from Trump, I think Azure Drake is one way of doing it. The other one is Sylvanas, because if Realz has a Defender of Argus, he just plays Sylvanas and then takes the buffed Ancient Watcher, or the Defender of Argus. But what he's going to end up doing is killing it with a double Deadly Poison Dagger. It's one way of getting an Arcanite Reaper. But yeah, it is a very awkward position now for Realz, where he has to face a 5/1 Dagger that is not easy to deal with, quite frankly. But what we're probably going to end up seeing here is a Shadow Bolt onto the 4/4, and then probably an Earthen Ring Farseer. The other thing we could see is Life Tap into Shadow Bolt. Actually, can we? How many cards has he got? He's got 9. Yeah, we could see a Life Tap, go up to 10 cards, and then a Shadow Bolt. He's definitely Shadow Bolting. The real question is, what else does he play? Okay, he's going to Life Tap into Shadow Bolt. That makes sense. Earthen Ring Farseer is sometimes better to keep to heal your own board, or heal yourself up when you really need it. In this case, he didn't need it, so meh. Now, we can either see an Argent Commander, or Shattered Sun Cleric Defender is another one. Cleric Defender is still vulnerable to Hellfire. Everything's vulnerable to Hellfire at this point, so... But he would get full value out of it. The other one is Sylvanas, but blank Sylvanas is kind of sketchy. And the last one's Argent Commander. I think, all things considered, Trump has had several turns where he's played a bunch of things that could have been Hellfired, and they haven't been Hellfired, even though it would have been the most efficient way of killing the board. So I think I would probably go for the Shattered Sun Cleric Defender, because the amount of information that he has shows that might not be a Hellfire. Argent Commander could work. It can get Siphon Souled, but an Argent Commander with Shield is also very difficult to deal with. This is a bit of a tricky one. I think in the end we're probably going to see an Argent Commander, just because of how many cards Realz has drawn. It's kind of unlikely he doesn't have the Hellfire. So we're probably going to see an Argent Commander, and then attack for 5. At least that's what I'm expecting. Random comment today, because the games are so long, this is one of the products of having Trump as one of the games. Doing a 3-game weekly would end up being like an hour and 10 minutes, so I'm doing a 2-game weekly with a bit of a break in between the 2 games just to talk about the various different things, and if anyone has any questions they can ask then, etc. Yeah, we did see the Argent Commander. Now, he's got a couple of options here. He has Ironbeak Owl into Shadow Flame, or he could Life Tap, see what he draws, but then he doesn't have enough mana to do the Ironbeak Owl Shadow Flame. I think Ironbeak Shadow Flame is probably the best way of doing it. It is a 2-for-1, but you're actually quite far ahead in cards at this point. So yeah, Ironbeak Shadow Flame is probably the best one here. Yeah, he did end up going with it. Okay, so he drops a bit in card advantage, but he clears the board, and that's all he needs to do. So, yeah, now that he's used the Shadow Flame, he's going to start building up the board a bit. Now that he has the opportunity. And then he should just pass the turn here. There's no point in attacking with the weapon at all. Now, Realz could drop a Giant. It's one way of doing it. He can Life Tap Giant. He can also Earthen Ring Farseer with a Life Tap, see what he draws, and give it Taunt possibly. The wind in the background. It's being loud. Anyway, I think we're probably going to see some sort of Life Tap into Earthen Ring Farseer play. He can go Giant, but Giants are sometimes better as a surprise, so I'm not sure about that. Next turn he probably has 3 Giants, so I'm not sure whether playing a Giant now is entirely necessary. 1 Giant's quite easy to pick off. Earthen Ring into Defender. Okay. I'm not sure about that. I mean, it plays around things like Shattered Sun Cleric, but then it gets daggered, so it's a bit sketchy. Now, what we're probably going to see here is running the dagger into the 4/4 and then just clericing the Luke Hoarder and attacking, cycling, and then see what he draws. Probably the best play overall. Let us see. Yeah, this is what Trump is infamous for. You can get up, go make a cup of tea, come back, and he's still making the same move. Yeah, this is pretty much the only reason why it's a 2-game weekly. It's impossible to make a 3-game weekly with Trump in it. The games last way too long. Okay, I think he's gonna go for the play in the end. Yeah, he is. Take out the defender, see what he draws. Argent Commander. I'd probably just play the Argent and attack, but then you bring him down too low. I'm actually a bit on the fence here. I think he's starting to realize, yeah, the health total would go down too low. He really should not attack with that 2/1. He can't afford to bring him down to the point when he can put out giants straight away. Yeah, I would not attack with that 2/1 at all. You should just end the turn. If he attacks with a 2/1, then he's leaving himself open to double Molten Giant, which is a problem. Yeah, well played. Realz can still go double Molten. He can go into life tap. Yeah, he can life tap, go down to 3-cost giants, and then double giant, which would cost 8 mana total. So he can do that. Yeah, the other option is Hellfire into double giant. I think I prefer that. Leaves him with a better board. But I think, yeah, he misplayed that. He could have life tapped and then got free giants. He wasted a bit of mana there. Yeah, ooh, that was a really bad turn of events for him. That was horrible. Like, he went for one plan and then changed halfway through. So what ended up happening there was he went for the Hellfire play into giants, but then he wanted to play his he wanted to give them taunt as well, and he soul fired and he got greedy. So he lost some mana there for no reason. He should have been able to do the whole combo and then soul fire something, so that was a misplay. Now with Sylvanas we have a problem. I think life tap would be the correct thing to start with here. If he life taps and then he see what he draws, but if he doesn't draw anything that's live, he can attack Sylvanas with a giant and then Siphon Soul the giant that's stolen, or if it steals the 8/2 he can Hellfire. So yeah, I think that the correct play here is to life tap, see what he draws, and then if he doesn't draw anything useful, just go for the Siphon Soul or the Hellfire. We gonna see a life tap here? He's thinking about it, but yeah, he should definitely life tap first. He's gonna life tap first no matter what. He's gonna life tap, And he draws the Iron Beak Owl. That's a crazy top deck. That's a good game. He can silence and then attack straight up and then Soulfire. That's 20 damage. That's a good game. That was an insane top deck. That was possibly the best top deck he could have got. That was crazy. But anyway, the point is, if he hadn't top decked, he probably would have just Siphon Souled the Giant that got stolen, or Hellfire, depending on which one got stolen. And it wouldn't have been the end of the game. He still would have had a decent chance at winning, especially with the Alexstrasza and the other Giant in his hand. So the game wasn't over if he didn't draw the Iron Beak Owl, but the Iron Beak Owl just made him win the game instantly. Anyway, so that game was fairly even, but Trump ended up losing because he didn't have the tech cards that are required to beat Shields Up Warlock as a rogue. Rogue Cantrip, purest Rogue Cantrip, has a very bad matchup against Warlock Giants. Like Giant variants or Shields Up variants, they're just horrible. If you run enough tech cards like Black Knight, Assassinates, things like that, hard removal givers, then you have a very good matchup. Because he plays a Giant, gives it taunt, you tempo him to death with all the hard removal, and you just smash through and deal a bunch of damage in one go and win. So the deck has a very good matchup if it has the tech cards, a very bad matchup if it doesn't have the tech cards. And Trump, as I said, was not playing a deck with techs in it. It was playing a very purist version of the deck that didn't really have one-offs of any kind, playing just solid two-offs all the time. And he suffered for it. He really did suffer for it. So that was expected in the end, losing to a bad matchup if you don't have the tech cards to deal with it. Anyway, if anyone has any questions on that last game, go ahead and ask now while I go over the Druid deck that Trump is going to bring in for the second game. So this Druid deck is a Druid beatdown deck, which I did just make a video on. And as I said, there's a lot of interesting text that can be put in this deck, a lot of interesting legendaries that are put in the deck specifically. But anyway, so we'll start with Double Claw, something that's been dropped recently in these decks because it's very inefficient when it comes to removal. Because it's only a 1-for-1, you can't really cycle it like you can with Wrath, and it only hits 2, and you need to put 3 mana into it to get a 3 with hero power. The rest of the stuff, we've got Double Novice, pre-nerf remember, Double Wild Pyromancer, because he's playing a few more spells than normal. We've still got the Tinkmaster, the Swipes, 1 Starfall to help against aggro, which won't help that much in this situation, although it will do 5 damage direct, which is quite handy. We've got Sylvanas, Druid of Claws, Ancient Lores, and onto the actual tech cards, the legendaries. Karen is very difficult to remove, it has to be silenced or Tinkmastered to remove efficiently. We've got the Black Knight to deal with taunts. It's going to be very handy in this kind of situation, especially considering he's not running Naturalize. Ragnaros ends the game pretty quickly and also snipes Giants, which is essential. Cenarius is going to be not that good in this matchup, to be honest. It dies to a Giant hit. It is very vulnerable to AoE. So Cenarius isn't going to be too much of a force here. But the interesting thing is that last one, Deathwing. Deathwing is a card that's been played a lot recently in these legendary stalemate decks, because if you're in a mirror match or just another very late game deck, you just stall them out until you eventually draw Deathwing and they run out of hard removal, and then you play Deathwing and you instantly win the game. So it is an okay card if you're running that kind of deck. It's a terrible card if you're running it as the only legendary, but very, very good in these huge amounts of legendary win condition decks. Now, overall, I think that the matchup is very even. I would say that Trump is at a slight disadvantage here because he's running a lot of cards in the deck that don't do anything. Like Claws and Starfall doesn't do much, and Cenarius is not as good as something like Ysera would be in this situation. So he's running a couple of cards which are very bad in this kind of matchup, but then he's also running things like Sylvanas and Deathwing and Ragnaros, which are very good in the matchup. As for Realz, most of the cards he's running are live. Most of them will do something. Shadow Flame can be powered up massively. Hellfire helps out with the early stuff. Shadow Bolt's a bit okay. It's going to have to be used on some of the early stuff like Harvest Golems to be relevant. It can also help with bursting down things like a Cairn or a Black Knight with a Mortal Coil. So most of his deck is very live. The Iron Beak Owls are very handy in this matchup. It's an advantageous matchup for the Warlock deck in this situation. And I forgot to mute this. As usual. Whatever. Is that synced properly again? Yes, yes it is. Okay, so Realz has a okay hand. Kind of okay. He's got the Hellfire as early game insurance. Mortal Coil is useful to have in your opening hand. Sylvanas and Siphon Soul is pretty bad. But he just drew Sun Fury Protector, which is actually quite good. And Twilight Drake. So yeah, he's got an okay hand. Trump has a pretty good hand. He's got Coin into Harvest Golems. He's got turn 2 Harvest Golem, turn 3 Harvest Golem, and then turn 4 Cairn, which is incredible. That's one of the strongest openings you can have as a druid. He also has Tinkmaster for a giant later on in the game, and Blood Mage, which helps out a lot whenever he draws a removal spell. The real question is, how's he going to deal with these Twilight Drakes? Twilight Drakes are very, very difficult to deal with for a druid deck without the silence. If he draws the silence, he's in a good spot. If he doesn't draw the silence, he's in a horrible spot against these things. Now, we're probably going to see the Twilight Drake here. What is that? A +8? So it's going to be a 4/9 Twilight Drake. That's insane. I don't see a way of dealing with that. He's not going to Tinkmaster it. He's just going to probably put down the Cairn. He's definitely not Tinkmastering that, though. So the real question is, how does he deal with this thing? I think at this point he's just going to go for the Cairn and then hope for the best. But I'm not sure overall. Oh, second Twilight Drake. Now, if he hadn't drawn the Twilight Drake, I would say that silencing the Cairn, attacking with a Twilight Drake, and then Mortal Coiling it would have been the best play. But a second Twilight Drake is absolutely brutal. If he just goes for a second Twilight Drake and then attacks straight up, or takes out a Harvest Golem, it's just insane. He has... Okay, so Trump has 8 damage on the board, which means he can't kill a Twilight Drake at all at this point. He has to hero power it and skip part of his next turn if he wants to kill one. And if he does, he'll weaken his board substantially. So I do expect from Realz here, we're just going to see a second Twilight Drake. Because then if he goes second Twilight Drake and the next turn gives both of them taunt, there's just no way back from that in most situations. Trump does have the Black Knight and the Tinkmaster, so it's a bit different in this situation, but it's an incredibly powerful start from both of these players. Yeah, Realz is thinking about going for the Silence Mortal Coil play over the Twilight Drake play. By doing that, he does get a safer board as opposed to a more explosive board. But I think I do prefer the stronger play as opposed to the disruptive play. The disruptive play in this case is silencing the Cairn and then killing it flat out. But the more powerful play would just be playing the second Twilight Drake. Yeah, he's going to go for the more powerful play. Mortal Coil, one of the Harvest Golems, get it off the board. And then just go for the second 4/9 Twilight Drake. I think Trump just has to go for Sylvanas here. He doesn't really have a way out of this. He can't kill the Twilight Drake. He doesn't want to Tinkmaster one of them because of the amount of giants in the deck. He's just going to go for the Sylvanas and hope for the best, I think. Yeah, he can't kill one, so he's just going to go straight for the face, I should imagine. Drawing Defender is absurd here. He's probably just going to silence the Sylvanas and then play Defender and kill the Sylvanas. Okay, yeah, he's going to end up going for that. Now, the 5 attack is very notable here. Now, the question is which one does he attack with? I should say he should attack with the 5/10, because then it becomes a 5/5 and he can't trade with the Karen, and it also means he's less vulnerable to silence effects and Black Knight. And people may be thinking, wait a second, how he can't play around Black Knight because he doesn't know Trump has it. But Black Knight is so common nowadays that you really should expect it, and just expecting hard removal in general. There isn't any AoE access for the druids that can blow out a board that's got a 5/8 and a 5/5 on it, so I would just attack with the stronger one, weaken it a bit, and have two Twilight Drakes that are quite strong as opposed to one that's very strong on the other one which is pretty weak. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, he's gonna go for the stronger attack. Okay, now with the second one, I should imagine that he's just gonna go straight for the face here. Yeah, there's no point in going for the other one. Now Trump is just gonna Black Knight this. He could go for the Keeper, but if he goes for the Keeper, it'll lose taunt, so he can't kill it, and he'll just have to face a 4/1. So he's probably gonna Black Knight the 5/8, and then just kill the 5/5. And get his 4/5 and his 2/1. Yeah, I think I do appreciate that. Really? Why? I mean, he has a weaker board overall. He has a 2/1, a 2/4, and a 4/5 as opposed to two 4/5s and a 2/1. And he took 3 damage. But he's trying to save the Black Knight for the Giants, I think. But he has a Tinkmaster, so I'm not sure if that was the correct play. That was a bit sketchy. But anyway, what are we going to see from here from Realz? Probably a Sylvanas, life tap Sylvanas. We could also see a Shadow Bolt, but I think life tap Sylvanas is probably the better play here. But what's really annoying about that is that Realz has no good way of dealing with 2 4/5s and a 2/1. He had no good way of doing it. He could Sylvanas and then give it taunt perhaps, but then he'd lose his Iron Beak to 1 and it would just be sketchy. So yeah, I'm not sure about that from Trump. Interesting. He's going to go for the full trade and then heal himself back up a bit with the other ring. Okay, I can see that. Less powerful, more safe. Yeah, I can agree with that. Now we're going to see an Ancient Teachings. We're going to see the Draw 2 from the Ancient Lore. The Arcane Intellect on a 5/5, so to speak. Now, here I think we're just gonna see the Giant. Yeah, life tap first. He's learned his mistake from last game. He's gonna life tap first, go for the Giant, and then possibly give both of them taunts. And he doesn't have an efficient way of killing that. He could just Shadow Bolt it and then trade. I think that's probably the best play. Again, he doesn't know that Trump has a Black Knight, and at this point most people would assume he doesn't have it because he didn't use it on the 5/8 earlier. But it's still possible. So I think he's just going to go for the Shadow Bolt. Yeah, Shadow Bolt trade. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now, I would say he's at the advantage now. I'm guessing we're going to see a Tinkmaster. He's going to go for the draw, and then he's going to Tinkmaster the A8. He could go Novice Tinkmaster, but I think he's probably going to go Tinkmaster first in case he gets a 1/1 so he can kill the 1/1. But then if it's a 1/1, do you really need to kill it if you have a 2/1, a 1/2? Yeah, I think drawing was better there. drawing first, because while he could have killed it with the hero power if it was a 1-1, it didn't really matter. There's no way of abusing a 1-1, so to speak. So yeah, I think that was a slight misplay on his part. Now, this Devilsaur is the disadvantage of Tinkmaster. Now, while the 5-5 isn't much of an issue compared to an 8-8, compared to a 1-1, it's a huge difference. One of the reasons why Tinkmaster is overplayed a lot, in my opinion, the better players play it correctly, and it does very, very well. But some of the worse and newer players just play it whenever they see anything large, and in this case, he could deal with an 8-8 if it got taunt, but if this gets taunt, he doesn't want to Black Knight it, and it's just awkward. But he went for the gamble. If he had got a 1-1, it would have been a very, very good play for him. But he got a 5-5, which at this point is actually just as dangerous as an 8-8. So it's a little sketchy. He went for the gamble. We're going to see a life tap, and most likely Sylvanas Taunt, or Earthen Ring Taunt. I think Earthen Ring Taunt is probably better, actually. If you go Earthen Ring Taunt, then you have 2 mana open, which you can't use for anything. He's just going to go for the Sylvanas Taunt. Uses up more of his mana. We're probably going to see the Devilsaur get axed here by Black Knight. Wrath. Interesting. Now, what we could see here is while Pyromancer with Swipe and Wrath, would that clear the board? While Pyromancer would, yes, it would clear the board. He could Wild Pyro, swipe one of the 5/5s. No, he has to swipe the Devilsaur, and then he could trade his whole board into Sylvanas. He has to do it in a specific way, though. It's a bit complicated. He's got a couple of options. He could go for the Wild Pyro into swiping the 5/5, killing it, damaging the other two twice, ending up with a 5/3 and a 2/1, and then attacking the 5/3 with a Novice Engineer, and then wrathing it to cycle and clearing the entire board and avoiding any triggers. And that's 9 mana total. I think that would probably be the best play, actually. He doesn't really have that many other options. He could go for a Claw, possibly, but that's a bit sketchy. Ragnaros is a massive gamble, which might pay off, but if his opponent has Jiraxxus, for example, it would be game over. Black Knight is still probably going to be saved for something like a Giant. So yeah, I think Wild Pyro, Swipe, Wrath is probably the best play here. It's Trump syndrome. Okay. So he's going for the half trade. That's one way of doing it. He's gonna go for the claw into just blank Wild Pyro, I'm guessing. He's gonna go for the blank Wild Pyro. The reason I don't like this one as much is just because that was his only time where he could have got use of the Wild Pyro effect, whereas Claw could be used as direct damage, so bit of a waste, to be honest. Bit of a waste. I mean, it's gonna get Soul Fired, and that's gonna get a Siphon Soul out of his hand. What do you do here, though? Just Ragnaros? Ragnaros and then hope for the best? YOLO Rag, as people like to call it. He's so far behind now because of that Alexstrasza. He could YOLO Rag. I think it's his only option here. The other one is Ancient Allure, but Ancient Allure won't do much. He's just going to go for the YOLO Rag into Blood Mage. I would have just hero powered. Yeah, so it didn't kill the 8/8, and it's going to get Siphon Sold, and that's probably good game. I don't see a way back from this. Yeah, I don't see a single way back from this. He can go ahead and Earthen Ring Farseer, and then he's in, and then I think he just wins. It's going to go for the Earthen Ring, yeah. That's probably a good game. I don't really see a way out of this. Trump doesn't have any hard removal. There's the Starfall. He could Starfall it for 6 and then suicide himself to kill the Alexstrasza, but that wouldn't accomplish much. The other one is Ancient Allure, Innervate Starfall, but that wouldn't do anything either. He has to Ancient Allure. Ancient Allure healing himself and then Innervate Starfall. The AoE Starfall would let him live. Kinda. Well, it would let him live as far as he knows, but there's a Soulfire in Realz' hand, so that wouldn't accomplish anything. I think he's just dead. He could Ancient Allure. He'd have to draw cards that aren't in his deck. He'd have to draw like a Naturalize and a Wrath or something. Yeah, he's gonna go for the healing, but that's a good game if he goes for the healing. I mean, he couldn't know that, but yeah, that's a good game. He's got the Soulfire. And GG. So, what did we see from this game? We saw a couple of things about the matchup, which is, again, even though the Druid deck was running the techs it required, it didn't run a lot of things like hard removal. Instead, it ran sort of anti-aggro techs, which I don't like in Druid decks, because Druid decks actually have a pretty good matchup against aggro with things like Harvest Golems and Wraths. So he ran a couple of aggro techs as opposed to anti-late game deck, like deck techs. So it seems a bit of a sketchy matchup overall. There were a lot of times where there were some cards which were just not doing much, like the Wild Pyromancer, and we saw that that Wild Pyromancer was ended up just being used as a 3/2. It doesn't have much use in this matchup at all. About a third of Trump's deck did not have much use in that matchup, whereas most of Realz' deck actually was very useful in the matchup. So it felt like a bit of a sketchy thing overall. Other things we saw were a couple of weird misplays in both games from Trump, which is where he gets his reputation from, as being a bad constructed player and only good at arena. I wouldn't say he's a bad constructed player, he just makes some odd decisions sometimes. I do refrain nowadays from calling people bad players, because a lot of the time the people making those judgments are actually worse than those people that they're judging. So while it did seem like Trump made a bunch of misplays that sort of people didn't go for, and then there was also Realz' misplay on the life tap with the double Molten Giants. When you're actually in the game, it's not that easy to figure out exactly what you're going to do. But anyway, there was actually another Ihearthu King of the Hill recorded with Realz, which I'm going to be doing next week if it's out by then, which I'm not sure if it will be. But if it's out by then, I'm going to be doing that for the next weekly as well, because as I said, I'm doing any of the Ihearthu. Normally I do one Ihearthu King of the Hill every so often, but if it's got a Mana Grind team member in it, I'm going to cover it, because yeah, that's what I do. I am part of Mana Grind. So anyway, if there's any questions, ask now, because I'm going to be signing off in a couple of minutes. So go ahead and ask. I think the Twitch chat's still working. I've got a couple of people saying something. But yeah, if someone could just say something in chat just so I can check whether it's working or not. And if so, then I'll take a couple of questions. Problem is that there's a delay in the stream, so I need to wait for about 30 seconds for someone to actually type something. In other news, the Paladin control deck, or healing deck, or whatever people want to call it, that will probably be weekly at some point if it becomes popular, because it was going to be one of the 5 decks I was going to talk about, but it ended up not being one of them because it kind of changed an extreme amount. So yeah, that might be weekly at some point. Yeah, I've been having problems with chat continuously while streaming recently, where the chat keeps crashing. It's actually the reason why in last week's weekly I was going to do a question section on the 2 decks I went over, but the chat didn't work at all, so I actually didn't see any of the chat messages for the entire weekly. It was a bit awkward. Okay, if there's no questions, then I am just going to close out the weekly show. But yeah, as I said, for next week, we're probably going to have the second King of the Hill that Realz is in, just because the fact that he is a Mana Green team member. Video schedule is pretty much back to normal. So we're going to have a weekly show and tournament recap. The rest of the stuff was just sort of a special event for me. Every so often, when there is something that's interesting, I will do a video on it. So big news, patch reviews, things like that, any projects I'm working on, anything with Moon or Shiv, etc. But anyway, as for now, thank you all for watching. This has been Jotto, signing off.